Um, Often it's my preference to like not share my screen necessarily because then it's harder to like keep track of if people have questions, if there's something going on, in if there's something going on in the chat. I prefer to sort of have some attention to there, but we can try and we'll see if people feel like they're not able to like figure out even like where we are, then we can switch over to that. The other thing I would recommend is I have open my Masachet Gittin, and if you have one available to you, all the sources we're going to look at are on the handout. But like it's a Gemara Shiur, and most of the sources we're going to look at today are on the page or they're cited on the page. And if this were like a full-fledged baby drash, you'd be pulling the Yerushalmi off the shelf and pulling all of our other texts off the shelf as we go through. And instead, I give them to you all curated and nice on a handout. But there is something that's very fun about the Vilna Shas, not because like Moshe came down from Har Sinai with a Vilna Shas. Obviously not. There weren't Jews in Vilna when Moshe came down from Har Sinai, and they certainly weren't printing books. But but because it kind of opens up other things that could catch your eye or be exciting or catch your attention, and that's why I like learning out of book Gemaras. Um, but I will say, and I'll point out when we get there. There's a very long postword on the page. The one that starts the last postword on the page is Man Shaitan Shamit. I really hope we get to it, but when we get to it, you're welcome to follow along inside, obviously. But I want us to only do a selection of it, and you might find it easier to follow what we're doing in terms of the selection um, if you look inside the handout only at that point. So for the things that are on the page of Shas, that would just be my one little recommendation there. That's what I wanted to say by way of orientation. The next thing I want to say by way of orientation is that and we're gonna look tonight for those of you who like took a sneak peek at the handout. You'll see I literally put a Pruzbol template from the OU onto the handout, and we'll get to it. I think it's source 5 or something like that. Yeah, source 5. But before we even get to there, I think there's just one piece of orienting like thinking that is really obvious. And once I say it, it's really obvious. But if you've never thought about it before, it's just worth kind of planting, which is that when we're talking about Pruzbol, so we're talking about Shmitat Ksafim, which is, and we'll get to obviously the biblical verses about that, or source number one, but it's releasing loans during the Shemitah year. And there's actually a big debate about like when in the Shemitah year loans are released. Are they released at the end of the Shemitah year? Or are they released at the beginning of the Shemitah year? The verses are unclear, as we'll see. But Shemitah Ksafim is the release of loans, the release of monies. And it's the only part of Shemitah that is enacted outside of the land of Israel. So when we're sitting here at 8 p.m. Eastern, and certainly nobody in the land of Israel is joining us tonight, I can probably say with like a good amount of confidence that everyone here is in the Galut. And when we sit in the Galut, we sort of have to wonder, like, how do we connect to this idea of Shemitah? It's a Shemitah year, but it's not affecting my produce. Maybe I have to look out if like my local supermarket imports oranges or almonds from Israel, then I have to be, a little bit more careful. When were they picked? What's the status of them? Are they Gittin? Are they whatever? See, I think Rabbi Zukir's class for all of those different options. But most of the time, Shemitah feels like very distant when you're sitting in the Galut. And you have to remember that for a very long time, the vast, vast, vast majority of Jews were in the Galut, and it would be a Shemitah year. And what would their experience of Shemitah be? It would be Shemitah Ksafim. It would be this release of loans, which is lived out everywhere that Jews are. This is not an Eretz Yisrael related or Eretz Yisrael specific obligation. This is an everywhere obligation. And nowadays, if I want to take out a loan, my first loan that I'm going to take out is probably like a credit card, maybe, or I have a mortgage, so that's going to a large bank. I'm probably not going to like first turn to my friend for a loan. Though of course there are people who would do that, or turn to their family for loans. But especially in a time and place where Christians, let's say, aren't charging interest, and Jews are actually the primary money lenders, and that's maybe the primary, actually the primary occupation that Jews can even be in. So when you think, who can I borrow money from? You're gonna say, obviously, I'm borrowing money from a Jew, because what Christian would lend money to a Jew? Then all of a sudden, like Pruzbol becomes really important, because the Pruzbol is the question of how does that in a time when, well, if I have to release the loan, then maybe I'm not going to lend to you at all. Pruzbol is the answer to that, or the choice to not do a Pruzbol and actually release the loan, which is obviously a big choice, and a beautiful one should someone choose to make it, for sure. Okay, so we haven't even gotten to, I think I've like said a little bit too much, because we haven't gotten really into any of it yet. But the main point I wanted to say was just that I think sometimes, because we live in this like miraculous day where we have the land of Israel, and we have, people trying to figure out, like, how am I supposed to live on this year when I can't grow food off the land? We put a lot of time and focus into the like land themed parts of Shemitah. But what we're going to see tonight, and right now, if we turn to source one, and now you have to be either in the Tanakh or in the handout, we're in Devarim 15. You'll see that this release of loans is like, it's not just like, oh, some secondary part of Shemitah, and the real Shemitah is the land. The release of loans is essential to Shemitah. So here we go. We're Devarim 15:1. Mikate Sheva Shanim Ta'aseh Shemitah. Every seventh year you'll do Shemitah. V'zeh davar hashmita, and this is the nature of the Shemitah. Shamot kol baal mashay yado asher yashat b're'ehu. Every creditor will remit the due that he claims from his fellow. So everyone who has lent out money remits that loan. I lent money to Evie, and now it is the Shemitah. I say, Evie, that money is yours. That is what it means. Shamut kol baal mashay yado asher yashat b're'ehu. Okay, and just notice also, like, this word zeh davar hashmita. This is the nature of Shemitah, shamut. So what does shin mem het mean in the Torah? If you look it up in a BDD, let's say, or in like one of the classic Bible dictionaries, shamut means to release or to let fall. So it's the same word when you say to release the land, but here, zeh davar hashmita, this is the essence of the Shemitah, is actually the release of loans, is the Shemitah itself. Okay. Don't bill your fellow. They use here, the translation I have is don't dun your fellow. It's a little old-fashioned, or kinsman. For Shemitah, the Shemitah that has been proclaimed is of God. So you can bill the foreigner. If I lent money to a non-Jew, that's when I can keep that. I can go try and collect on that loan. But my loan for the loan that I gave to Evie, I have to remit that loan, because she's my brother. She's my sister. And then the Torah kind of gives us this insight into what the point is. So FS kilo yadacha yon kivarich yirach Hashem ba'aretz asher Hashem lokachan v'hinachan achal ishta. Now there won't be anyone who is poor amongst you, because Hashem will bless us in this land that is our inheritance. But the only way that that's going to happen is rak im shamo et yishma v'kol Hashem lokacha yishmor la'asot et kol mitzvah zot asher nafim etzavecha hayom. That will only happen if we keep all of the mitzvot as described in Sefer Devarim. Ki Hashem elokacha be'erachacha kasher diberlach, because God will bless us as He promised us. Ve'vatata goyim rabim v'ata lo tavut. You will extend loans to lots of other people, but you won't require any loans yourself. Right? Loans signify poverty. Poverty including a loan. Nowadays we don't think of it that way, because everyone has a loan. Everyone's house is like 3/4 owned by the bank or whatever. It's the person who who has enough wealth to even get a loan, right? Because getting a loan when you don't have any proof that you'll be able to pay it back, that's impossible, right? So only wealthy people now get loans, but in the Torah, that's not the way it's understood at all. Loans are for poor people in the Torah, not for rich people. And that's a very important like paradigm shift when you're reading classic Jewish texts about loans, which is what we are. Right? So other people are going to need loans and you'll be able to make the loans to them because you're going to be so wealthy because you'll have lived in the land and followed Hashem's commandments, and Hashem's going to give us many, many brachot. You'll dominate lots of other nations. They will not dominate you. But it could happen. It could happen. It could happen that there'll be a needy person amongst you in the land that God gives you. What are you supposed to do? Don't harden your heart. Don't shut your hand. We're going to have some like good hand imagery here. Don't shut your hand against your needy kinsman. You will surely open your hand to them. And you will lend him sufficient for whatever he needs. And for those of you familiar, this is not what we're doing today, but or in this series at all, but for those of you who are familiar with the Gemaras about tzedakah, these texts are super important. That's like one of the most like where that gets taken in Hilchot tzedakah is like really amazing. And fascinating, but we're not going there. But anyways, just to say this is like one of those core texts about Hillel tzedakah are these two here. But here's the point. More beware lest you harbor the bli ya'al, the base, just like terrible, degraded thought as follows. The seventh year, the year of remission, is approaching. And you are mean to the needy neighbor and you don't give him because you say, oh, Shemitah's coming and I can't give him a loan. I'm never going to collect on it because Shemitah's in a minute. So what's even the point? Why would I give him a loan? I'm not going to help him. I'm not going to help him because I'm not going to get it back. So I'm not going to give loans before this year. The Torah calls that Devar im levavcha bli ya'al. And we're going to dive in a moment in the source 3 in Ketubot. We're going to look at that. We're going to look at what that bli ya'al, what that might signify in the eyes of the Gemara's Midrash. But clearly the Torah is saying that's really bad. Don't think that. Be generous. Not low, right? Give him readily. Oh, sorry, I skipped half a pasuk. Right? So if you don't give him, then the kara el Hashem, then the poor person will call out to God, and you will incur guilt because you did not give that person a loan, even as the Shemitah year approached. Then the Torah exhorts, not low, give to him readily, the low yiral and don't have any regrets when you do it. Because when you give these generous loans that you may not collect back, at the end of the day, God will reward you, and God, through God's blessing, you'll get it back to you through all of your successes. And then the Torah says, so just like a little bit of like a recap here. There will never cease to be needy ones in your land, and therefore you are commanded, open your hand to the poor and the needy kinsman in your land. Very important. Open your hand. Open your hand. Keep those hands wide open. Says the Torah over and over and over again. Good. Ozzy says, it says there will be no needy, and then it says there will never cease to be needy. Good. So Rashi and many, many other commentators asked that question, but that is source number 2. I just brought you the Rashi because it's exactly as it was for Ozzy. It's really kind of glaring you in the face. How could the Torah within such a short period of time say there won't be any poor people and there will always be poor people? So Rashi says there won't be any poor Jews if you follow all of Hashem's commands in the land. And so right, Bisman Shatamosim Shal Makom says Rashi first asks the question and then says in the times when the Jews are doing the desire of God, as Yonim Be'achirim, there will still be poor people, but they will be Be'achirim. They will be the needy will exist, but they will be amongst others, the lo bachem, and not amongst you. But when you are not doing the will of the omnipresent, then the needy will be amongst you. That's just one option of many for how to navigate it, but it's the classic one brought by Rashi. And I don't want to spend a ton of time on these psukim, but you can't understand the problem that Pruzbol poses without having seen the psukim, because what Pruzbol does is it allows people to not remit their loans. So first of all, the word shmita means remit. And second of all, Hashem literally says in the Torah, don't let it cross your mind not to make a loan because Shmita is coming. Remit your loans and Hashem will bless you. And then along comes Hillel and says, people aren't making loans, so we're going to invent Pruzbol, which is literally anticipated by the Torah and commanded against. So that's kind of the, right? So we have to see the psukim, but I also don't want to spend forever on all the beautiful complexities and learning that could come out of it. Because again, I mentioned before, as we were going through, like so much of it comes out of this. We could spend a year just on these psukim and all that the Gemara and the Halacha do with them and all the interpretive possibilities, but we're going to keep going. But I do just want to drill into this language of Leah for a second, because again, I think it really raises the ante on why Pruzbol is like so weird and so problematic. So we have this Gemara in Ketubot, we're just looking at like a tiny snippet of it. Ketubot Tamechet Amar Aleph. Tani Rabbi Chia bar Rav Mizifti, we're in source 3. Rabbi Chia bar Rav from Mizifti and Rabbi Yoshua ben Karcha say, anyone who does not, who averts his eyes from the obligation to give charity, it's as if he did avodah zarah, as if he worshipped idolatry. K'tiv hachav in our verses it says over here by charity, beware that there not be a base thought in your heart. Uktiv hatam, and it says over there by irnidachat, by the idolatrous city that gets burned to the ground. Yatu anashim b'nei b'liyah. Certain base fellows go out and then they turn the whole city into an idolatrous city, and then you go and you see it and then you burn the whole thing down, right? You have this connection of this like b'liyah kind of thinking, and the two b'liyah type of thinkings that are described in Devarim are the idolaters who not only are they idolaters, they go and convert an entire city to idolatry. That's example number one of b'liyah thinking. And then the second example is our example of this person who doesn't want to make a loan because Shemitah is coming. So it's this person who doesn't want to make a loan because Shemitah is coming, right? The Gemara calls him an idolater. And then along comes Hillel and says, I'm going to enable that line of thinking through Pruzbol. So just to say, like, I'm just trying to paint you a picture of just like how incredibly strange and complicated Pruzbol is. And the Gemara is going in this direction, right? The Gemara assumes we all understand how strange Pruzbol is. So I just needed to like bring you all on this little journey. Okay. Now we're going to look at the Sifrei, and then we'll look at just how Pruzbol works for a second after we look at the Sifrei. But the Sifrei is going to explain kind of what the like mechanism or option one of what the mechanism of Pruzbol is. And the Gemara is going to actually not go exactly in this direction. The Gemara is go option 2, and I think next week really we'll be able to have like a fuller sense of what all of the like mechanical options are for Pruzbol. But we'll see 2 of them tonight, and here's the first one. So Sifrei is Midrash Halacha. So it's, the way it works is it takes like a few words at a time of the Torah and then derives halacha from them, from maybe like something interesting it notices in the psukim or something like that. So here we go. Asher ya lecha et achicha. The Sifrei explains, right, in what you have with your brother, velo shel achicha beyadacha, and not what belongs to your brother who's in your hands. Meaning, it's not, just to go back to the Evie example. Shemitah Aksavim is when Evie has my stuff and I don't have any of her stuff, right? That's what the Sifrei here is pointing out. Mikana Talmer, so from here we can say, Hamalve al hamashkon in shvi'it mishametet. So if I lent Evie $1 million and in exchange she gave me diamond earrings, Shemitah doesn't release the loan. Evie, I can still collect on my $1 million because there's something of Evie's in my possession. So this is loophole number one for Shemitah Ksafim, Malve al Hamashkon. If I gave a loan for which I have collateral, or for which I have a pledge, that's a different word. They all mean collateral. So again, that's the diamond earrings in this case. Evie has $1 million of mine. I have her diamond earrings as collateral. Shemitah does not release the loan. I can still collect my $1 million from Evie, and once I do, I'll give her earrings back. So that's loophole number one to Shemitah. Okay. Loophole number two, et achicha tashmi'edacha. So when and what you have with your brother, your hand shall release. Velo hamuser sharotav lebitin, and not one who has handed over the shtarot, the bills, the receipts, the documents, recording the loan to the Gittin. So I gave Evie a loan of $1 million. I don't have her documents anymore. Those never happened. This is example number two. I gave Evie a loan of $1 million, and I have a receipt signed by me, Evie, maybe some witnesses saying, Rabbanit Leah gave me on this day $1 million. I promise to pay her back. Love, Evie. And then Shemitah's coming up, so I say, I see a Gittin of Judith, Noah, and Rebecca, and I say, okay, guys, here's your loan. Please take my paperwork for this loan. Now, all of a sudden, the star of this loan, the bill of this loan, is no longer in my hand. So when I have to release what's in my hand, there's nothing in my hand. I gave it to Judith, Noah, Rebecca. They're Gittin. They have it now. I don't have anything to release from my hand because the star that holds Evie to the loan, I don't have control over that star anymore. Okay, and so that is according to the Sifrei, Mikan Amru, this is the source. Hillel Hikin Pruzbol, mi-penei. This is the source for Hillel to have instituted Pruzbol. So how does Pruzbol work? And we'll see this inside momentarily. We'll see it in the Gemara in source 7. But if you wanted to know, it's Shemitah year and I haven't written the Pruzbol yet, don't worry. The majority of poskim think that you can write your Pruzbol until the end of this year, and that Shemitah something happens at the end of the year. So if you're sitting here right now saying, I didn't write a Pruzbol and Evie owes me $1 million, well, you are in luck. And here is what a Pruzbol text looks like. So this is literally from the OU's website. And it is required in Israel and outside of Israel. And here's what they say. This is the form. This is the document. In the presence of the undersigned 3 judges, duly constituting a Gittin, there appeared before us, let's say me, there appeared before us Leah Sarna, who declared before us as follows: I hereby turn over to you, judges, Rebecca, Noah, Judith, in this place, Zoom land, all of the debts owed to me, whether or not the debts are evidenced in writing, so that I may therefore collect these debts at any time that I desire. We, the undersigned Gittin, heard the declaration of the above described person, and have empowered such person to avoid having her debts canceled by Shemitah, and she may therefore collect all of her debts by virtue of this Pruzbol in accordance with the special enactment of Hillel and Chazal. In witness whereof, we hereby affix our signatures on this 13th day of Mar Cheshvan 5781 here in Zoom land. Signed, all of it. That would be a Pruzbol. Probably that would be interesting to find out whether you could do it over Zoom effectively, but I would recommend going to a Gittin in person. And probably, well, men probably, but for another time. Anyways, okay, so just that's, if you're wondering, how does the Pruzbol work? I think the document itself actually like pretty well lays it out. And keep that in front of you when we turn to the Gemara in a second, because you'll see that it like more or less is just a translation of the Gemara, which is pretty cool. Okay, so the Mishnah. So now you can open up your Messiah Gittin. As promised, a Gemara Shiur, and by 8:30 we'll be in the Gemara. So the Mishnah in the fourth paragraph of Gittin, many of them introduce this language that to us is very familiar as mi-penei tikkun ha-olam, for the betterment of the world. Many of the enactments for the betterment of the world are there to kind of protect women, which is very interesting. There's a good amount of like modern scholarly literature about because the phrase like tikkun ha-olam, or like l'takin, like from Aleinu, we're familiar with it, l'takin olam b'malchut shakai, right? To perfect or to fix up the world into or under the kingship of God. So like that version of like perfecting the world, and this version of like legal enactments that protect people, and typically almost always protect the underdog. So in Gittin, that's typically the woman, but not always. Here it's the poor person, right? Right? And it's worth it to spell it out for a second, right? The point of this is not to protect the bank or the wealthy person. The point of it is to make sure that wealthy people keep giving loans because poor people need loans, right? So that's just to be clear about like what is the tikkun ha-olam happening here. The tikkun ha-olam happening here is the continuation of there being loans. Right. So, and Gabriel, that's to your question. Why isn't the Beis Din obligated to release the debts if they hold them? So, I mean, that would be a possibility, but the point of Pruzbol is for that not to happen, because the point of Pruzbol is for me to keep lending. And in the idea of Hillel, and the understanding of Hillel, I'm not going to keep lending unless I can collect on my debts. So it happens that during Shmita, I'm not allowed to collect on my debts, but I can like pass over the shtarot to the Beis Din, and then they can collect on my debts for me. Or what's really happening is they own the shtarot, and then I can collect on my debts, which is not a crazy read of the Sifrei, right? That's a good read of the Sifrei. I do a Pruzbol. They're sitting on the documents, but I collect the loan. But Gabriel, does that make sense? Do you want to follow up on your question? Makes sense. Okay, amazing. Okay, I really like this of people putting questions in the chat, because it means I can like come back around some when the time is right. But also, if you have something burning and you want to interrupt, I'll feel very empowered to say, "Wait a minute," if you if that's what I need. So, anyways, okay. So we have this, and there's lots and lots and lots to say and to learn about like the history of this phrase tikkun ha-olam, because where I was stroking with this is that like the Mishnah's use of it is it's similar. It's like continuous with how we use it now, but it's not the same. And it's important when trying to understand what the Mishnah means by a word or by a phrase to like read it within the context of the Mishnah, which like we're not really going to do now because I want to get to the Gemara on Pruzbol. But I would say that like there is this, like I think we can like tap into our modern understanding that's been informed by lots of other like developments in terms of how this phrase is used over time. And I'm happy to like send some writing out about it. Leah Cooper has a great article about it. There's an article in Tradition about it. I'm blanking on the professor's name who wrote it. anyways, whatever. If people are interested, my email is sarna@drisha.org, and I can send you a whole reading list about this phrase tikkun ha-olam. But it's not exactly our topic for tonight. Okay. So, but our Mishnah contains a line. One of its 3 examples of tikkun ha-olam stated in the Mishnah. Hillel hitkin Pruzbol mi-penei tikkun ha-olam. Hillel instituted a Pruzbol for the betterment of the world. Okay. So here's the Gemara. We're on Gittin 36a. We're about maybe like 2/3 of the way. It's at the beginning of the line. Hillel hitkin Pruzbol. Okay, so Tanan ha-olam, it teaches over there. Over there in this case means Shvi'it, the Mishnayot of Shvi'it. I was going to bring the Mishnayot of Shvi'it, but the Gemara is just going to straightforwardly quote all of the relevant ones, so I didn't. If you were reading a Gemara and you were like, what is ha-olam? I don't know. So my Gemara has a little note that tells me, like the 10th chapter of Shvi'it. Otherwise, yeah, I mean, that's what's great about the Gemara. If you're like on Sefaria, you could click and it would tell you like other things that have the same, like the references or whatever, it would have it. Okay. Anyway, so Tanan ha-olam, it's taught over there in the Mishnah of Masechet Shvi'it. Pruzbol, eno mishamit. Oh, you might have noticed, by the way, that the word Pruzbol is very interesting. I think we're actually gonna talk more about the word next time because I had so much introductory material today. It was like too much. So in the introductory part next time, we'll talk about the word. But you might have noticed that between the Mishnah and here, we have changed our spelling of Pruzbol. So sometimes Pruzbol is spelled with a Zayin and sometimes it's spelled with a Samech. And that slipperiness should indicate to you that Pruzbol is not a Hebrew word. Also, Pruzbol, it's not a Hebrew word. So we'll talk a little bit more about what Pruzbol might mean and where it might come from next time. Okay, so it's not ha-olam teaches over there. Pruzbol eno mishamit. So when you have a Pruzbol, it doesn't then like the Shemitah year doesn't release the debt. This is one of the things that was established by Hillel the elder. Why? He saw the people, they stopped lending one to the next. And they were violating what was written in the Torah. Guard yourself in case you become this, right? This like idolatrous, like mean-spirited person who doesn't want to make a loan. Well, like they didn't guard themselves appropriately and they became those people and they were violating it, says Hillel. The Amad, and so Hillel gets up, the hitkin Pruzbol, and he invented a Pruzbol. That's the story. That's our origin story of Pruzbol. And it's so confusing because when the Torah says like don't kill, and we saw lots of people killing, we wouldn't be like, okay, like how do we make it allowed for people to kill each other? Like that's usually like not the move, right? So what's different about here that we actually like enable the people who are like doing something that the Gemara in Ketubot calls idolatry? Sorry, I didn't even go to killing. I could have stayed inside, right? What do we do when we see it, right? Exactly, like let's go to Ir Nidacha, right? What do we do when we see these 2 people and they have these Leah thoughts and then they bring a whole bunch of people along with them and all of a sudden everyone's doing idolatry? We don't say like, oh, idolatry? Well, now it's allowed because I made it 0. We burn it to the ground, right? We burn it to the ground. That's what the Torah says to do when everyone starts following the people who have these Leah thoughts. And then all of a sudden Hillel says, okay, like let's we're gonna make it okay. So just to like, I've said this like in so many different ways already in the last 36 minutes, but I'm gonna keep saying it. Right, Amad v'hitkin Pruzbol. V'zehu gufo shel Pruzbol, and this is the essence of the Pruzbol. But really, this is the text of the Pruzbol, right? Mosrani lachem ploni dayanim shuvakom ploni. Sorry, 1 second. Right, this is I transfer to you so and so the judges who are in such and such a place. That all the loans that are of mine that are right? Sorry, all of the like debts owed to me by this person, that I can collect them anytime that I want. So unlike our Pruzbol, which doesn't specify who, like it doesn't, like Evie's name, for example, doesn't appear in our Pruzbol. It's just me. I have some loans out. The Gittin's going to hold on to my loans. In the Mishnah's version of Pruzbol, you are listing the name of the person who is in debt to me. But then the hadayanim chodmim lamata, so the judges sign below, oh ha'edim, or the witnesses. Okay, so now the Gemara is going to ask our question. This is like underlined 6 times. Mi ika midi, the oraita mishamta shvi, the hikin Hillel v'lo mishamta. Is there such a thing that on a total level, the 7th year releases it, and Hillel can just come along and decree that it's not actually released? Right? That's our question. How is this even possible? This is crazy. Okay, and then we have more or less like a one line answer. Amar Abaye says, the Shvi Bazman Hazeh, in the Shvi of our times. Okay, here's the thing about Shvi Bazman Hazeh. So the question is, what does Bazman Hazeh mean? Right? Presumably it at least means in the time of Abaye. But what's the big difference between the time of Abaye and the time of Hillel? What was still standing in the time of Hillel? Right? In the time of Hillel, you still have the betterment. So that's a big problem. We're going to read a little bit more, but then the Iyun we're going to do together is going to be about that question, which is like, what does it mean that Hillel invented Pruzbol when the Beit HaMikdash still stands? And then the Gemara says, how is it possible that Hillel invented Pruzbol? And the answer that the Gemara gives, the answer that Avaya gives is, oh, it's Shvi in our time, which seems to mean Shvi, like Shvi Derabanan, like Shvi not on a total level of Shvi, but some like secondary or like degraded version of Shvi in our time. And so, but we just have to finish by a statement. So Rebbe he, and it is Rebbe, right? So because he's going to explain what Shvi Bizman Hazeh means. Rebbe he, the Tanya says in the Breita, Rebbe Omer, Rabbi Danasi says, Zed Devar Hashmita Shemot, right? So he quotes our verse, Zed Devar Hashmita Shemot. This is the matter of the releasing of the land, of the release. Sorry. This is the matter of the release. So that's confusing. Why does it say the matter of the release? Why is Shemitah Shemot? B'shtei Shemitot hakatuv medaber. The verse is talking about 2 different kinds of Shemitah. Achai Shemitah karka. One is the Shemitah of the land. The Achai Shemitah ksafin, and one is the Shemitah of money. Bizman shetam b'shami karka. When the Shemitah of the land stands, and then you have the Shemitah of money as well. But in a time when you do not have the Shemitah of the land, then you don't have the Shemitah of money either. The Rabbanit, the Tishmot, Zecher leShvi. But the rabbis instituted that you should do Shemitah Ksafin, that the Shemitah of money should stand even when the Shemitah of the land isn't observed on a total level or isn't observed at all, maybe, because Zecher leShvi, right? So Rashi there says, Zecher leShvi, Shelo Tishtakach Torah Shvi, that the whole idea of Shvi won't be forgotten. And by the way, like as I mentioned at the very beginning, that's not crazy. Like if you imagine that the vast majority of the Jewish people living outside of the land of Israel, and then you say, oh, and there's no any kind of Shemitah because all Shemitah, even Shemitah Ksafin, is relevant only when there's also Shemitah Karka, then the Jewish people living in Provence in the year 1100 or whatever are not going to have any Shemitah, and you're not going to remember the cycle, and you're not going to remember that it exists, and there's no enactment of it. and that's really not great, right? So you want there to be some kind of Shemitah that exists. We'll keep Shemitah Ksafim and we'll keep it everywhere. But then, so you have this Zecher L'Shvi'it that exists. So then continues Rebbe, right, that Abaye is quoting, Hillel, but then in that situation, Hillel saw that they stopped blending to each other, and Hillel gets up and says, no, we need a Pruzbol. But again, Hillel is when the temple is still standing. So we're left with this big question of like, what does it mean? Maybe we could get on board with when there's no temple, when there's no one in the land of Israel, that Shemitah in that time doesn't really exist, but we keep around Shemitah Ksafim because we want to remember, right? It's Zecher L'Shmitah, Zecher L'Shvi'it, Shalot Tishtakach Torah Shvi'it, right? Okay, we can get on board with all of that, but the problem is, like, is that the reality of Hillel? So that's where we're going now. So, if you will turn, please, to the Rashi that starts with the Shvi'it Bezman Hazeh. So we're back on Amud Aleph, and it's like kind of a long Rashi that starts like maybe like 2 lines after where we started in the Gemara, if you're following along there. And if you're in the source sheet, so I just brought you like a big chunk of Rashi. Sorry, you can see all my notes giving away. I just brought you like a big chunk of Rashi, but it's the second one down. All right, so B'shvi Bezman Hazeh, and Rashi asks a question. The Hillel Karebi Spiralai. So Hillel seems to hold like Rebbe. Hillel holds like Rebbe, which obviously Rebbe is long after Hillel, but okay, fine, right? So Hillel's reasoning is like what Rebbe said. The Amar Shvi Lahashmatat Malva Bezman Hazeh Rabbanit, who says that the releasing of a loan in the 7th year in our times is on a rabbinic level. But then Rashi says, the Afal the Hillel, the Bait Sheni have that even though Hillel was around in the times of the temple, Abaye seems to think, or he holds to the Bait Sheni, that in the second temple time, since Yovel wasn't practiced in the second temple, then in the time when you don't have Yovel practice, when you're not practicing Yovel, then you're also not practicing Shemitah on a Torah level. And we're going to look at that, or maybe hopefully we'll get to that source number 11, which Rashi, if you're inside your Gemara, you're going to see that Rashi here quotes Erechim. So I brought you the whole Erechim. We're going to see it in the context of the Pruzbol. But basically that Erechim is, the way Rashi quotes it is like kind of misleading and confusing, which is why I kind of like cut it out here. So we're just going to get to it later, but he says that Rashi understands that Gemara and Erechim to mean that Yovel was established in only a Derabanan way. But we're going to kind of move on from that. And then he quotes Matati the Talmudei Rabbinic Shekatav Masachet Gittin b'Yerushalmi. So I see it quoted in Rabbi Yitzchak Halevi, who saw in Masachet Gittin in the Yerushalmi. And this, by the way, like raises all kinds of questions of like, did Rashi have the Yerushalmi? We know that Pruzbol often quote the Yerushalmi, but like here we see Rashi quoting someone else quoting the Yerushalmi. Like that's kind of weird and interesting. I'm not like enough of a scholar to like know what everyone thinks about that question, but I think it is kind of an interesting point here. So minayin she'ena shmita noheget el bezman she'yovel noheg. How do we know that, and we're going to see this in the Yerushalmi inside in a minute, how do we know that the Shemitah is only practiced when Yovel is practiced? Shenamar v'zeh devar hashmitah shemot. It's that exact same like redundancy that we saw inside the Gemara, this 2 Shemitah shemot. Echad Shemitah Yovel, the Echad Shemitah Shvi. One for the Shemitah of Yovel and one for the Shemitah of Shvi. And then he says, Aval Ra'iti b'Torah Kodim, but I saw in the Midrash, the Shvi Noheg Bisman She'ein Yovel Noheg, that actually Shemitah is practiced in the time when Yovel isn't practiced. Vomer Anishu Machoget. And says Rashi, I see it as a machoget about whether Shemitah is practiced when Yovel is practiced or not. So basically, Rashi says, like, this is a big problem. brings a few different attempts to answer it, which like we know from Rashi on the Chumash. Whenever you see a Rashi this long, you know that Rashi doesn't know the answer, right? That's the classic way to read Rashi on the Chumash, is like when Rashi knows the answer, he brings one answer. When Rashi doesn't know the answer, he goes on, and maybe this, maybe that, maybe the other, right? It's the same thing Rashi and the Gemara, that when Rashi doesn't know the answer, he brings a bunch of answers, and he's not satisfied with any of them. So it's exactly the same thing happening here. Okay. So let's actually take a dive into source number 9. So we're in the Yerushalmi in Gittin. There's a parallel Yerushalmi in Shvi'it. I only brought you one of them because they kind of say the same thing. And this one is on our Mishnah. So here we go. We're in the middle of a discussion. I didn't bring all of it, but just like 2 snippets. So Chazar Rabbi Yossi the Amar, so Rabbi Yossi comes back and teaches that Devar HaShmita Shemot. So it's that same redundancy that's like right for Midrash. B'sha'ah she'ashmita nohaget ba'aretz midvar Torah. Hashmik ksafim noheg bein ba'aretz bein b'chutz la'aretz dvar Torah. So when the shmita of the land is practiced on a Torah level, the Oraita commandment, then shmita ksafim is also practiced, whether in Israel or outside of Israel, on a Torah level obligation. But when Shemitah is only practiced on a rabbinic level in Eretz Yisrael, then Hashmik Safim Noeg Bein Ba'aretz Bein B'chutz La'aretz Midivrayhem. So then Shemitah Ksafim is only practiced on a rabbinic level, whether here or there. I think we should like sidebar for a second to say that the question of whether Shemitah like today in 2021 is rabbinic or Torah, and we'll get to it kind of when we see like the Erechim stuff, whatever, is super big, giant question because of a lot of these sources, meaning like the same sources that are going to say, well, I guess we haven't even seen it yet, but we saw it in the Rashi and we'll see it inside the Yerushalmi in a second, like those same sources that say, oh, Shemitah is only on a Torah level when you have Yovel on a Torah level. So then, but first of all, like we don't necessarily need to hold that way. And second of all, like, well, okay, so when is Yovel enacted on the Torah level? And was it in Bayit Sheni? And if it was in Bayit Sheni, then should it be now? And Shemitah being the Rabbanan is one of like the big arguments behind, but before and against some of the different ways that people navigate buying produce in Israel. Literally today, like literally as we speak, well, I guess not literally as we speak because it's the middle of the night, but like tomorrow, literally tomorrow. And I think that just so you know, like this debate about like what constitutes Torah level Shemitah, that we're kind of seeing the raw materials of that debate, but it's very, very live and very, very present now. And there's other classes being offered by Shemitah in this little like semester thing we have going on that really cuts that, but so you're seeing some of those sources here. Okay, so then the next little Talmud Yerushalmi Gittin snippet. So another interpretation of the Zed Dvar HaShmita Shemot. Rebbe Omer Shnei Shmitin Shmita v'Yovel. So why does it say Shmita Shemot? Because there's 2 Shmitas, Shmita and Yovel. B'sha'ah she'Yovel noheg HaShmita nohaget midivrei Torah. So when Yovel is practiced, Shemitah is practiced on a Torah level. Pasku haYovel nohaget Shemitah midivrayhem. When there's no more Yovel, then Shemitah is practiced on a rabbinic level. Imatai pasku haYovel. When did Yovel end? This we have from, so he quotes from Vayikra. Hey, l'chol yosheveha. Yovel applies to all of Israel's inhabitants. Bizman sheyeshuvin aleha v'lo bizman shegalu mitocha. In times when they are sitting on it, when they are settled on it, and not in times when they have been sent out from, they've been exiled from it. Hayu aleha vayu me'orvavim shevet Yudah v'Binyamin shevet Binyamin v'Yehudah v'chol yaha Yovel noheg. So when you have Jews living in the land of Israel, but Benjaminites are in Judea and Judeans are in the Benjaminite land, is that l'kol yoshbeha? Is that what the Torah requires? Talmud Lomar Yoshveha. No, the Torah says Yoshveha, L'kol Yoshveha, and it's everyone where they're supposed to be in their like specific inherited land. Kivan Shigalu Shevet Reuven Begad B'chitzi Shevet Menashe Batlu Hayovlu. So from when Reuven, Gad, and half of Menashe were expelled, that was the end of Yovel. Which means Yovel was very, very, very short-lived in the scheme of Jewish history. And if you follow this, that means that Shemitah since that day has only been Rabbanit. So that's like the most extreme possible version of is Shemitah Rabbanit or okay, so then the question is, okay, so then the question, like, we're still sitting with this question of like, how is it possible that Hillel like created Pruzbol while the temple still stood? So this would be an answer, right? The Yerushalmi here is a very easy answer. Shemitah has been Derabanan since Reuven, Gad, Chatzi Shevet Menashe were exiled. They're never to be seen again. Shkoyach, now Shemitah is Derabanan. Hillel can make, so then Abaye's Bisman Hazeh and Hillel's Bisman Hazeh are the same. Temple stands, temple doesn't stand, doesn't matter. And we can just move on. But I think we don't have very much time left. I'm gonna think if we can skip even more of this tool swoop, but I do want you to see a tiny bit of it at least. Right, so he quotes at the beginning of it, if you're maybe try and follow along in the handout. So the first, because I just divided it into paragraphs, which obviously in the Gemara you're not gonna have paragraphs. So in the first paragraph that I have here, he quotes the Rashi, who says more or less what the Yerushalmi says, which is Hashmatat Karka Lo Naga B'Bayit Sheni, right? You didn't have Torah level Shemitah in Bayit Sheni. That's more or less what Rashi says, and quotes the Yerushalmi to say it. The Kasha LeRabbeinu Tam, now I'm in the second paragraph. Rabbeinu Tam asks the question, ha-olam via Yerushalmi, right? The Bavli should have just said what the Yerushalmi said. Like, why doesn't the Yerushalmi just says it so much better than the Bavli does? And the Yerushalmi solves all the problems. So why doesn't the Bavli just bring the argument of the Yerushalmi and all the people that the Bavli that the Yerushalmi had, like the Yossi, Rebbe, like the Bavli loves all those people, just like bring those teachings, problem solved. So Rabbeinu Tam says, why doesn't it bring the Yerushalmi? And Rabbeinu Tam says, over Rabbeinu Tam to the Bayit Sheni Nahag, not just Shemitah, Yovel. Rabbeinu Tam says in the Bayit Sheni you had Yovel. Okay, so how does he reason that? He says the rules about houses in walled cities, Bate Are Homa, were practiced in Bayit Sheni, and those laws are only practiced in a time when you have the Yovel. He says that I cut this out entirely, I think, but he has some other rules. He has what is it? He has another one here. Shivcha Charufa, right? Shivcha Charufa is only practiced when you have Yovel, argues Rabbeinu Tam, and that was practiced in Bayit Sheni. So therefore, it must be the case that in Bayit Sheni they not only had Shemitah on a Torah level, but they had Yovel, and that's Rabbeinu Tam's read of the Gemara. And he says, so he says, okay, so when Hillel established Pruzbol, he didn't establish it for his own generation. I'm just skipping a little bit here, but to the next underlined line. But rather, he established it for once the Beit HaMikdash was destroyed. And once the Beit HaMikdash was destroyed, they stopped practicing Yovel and stopped having Shemitah on a Torah level problem. So that's one option according to Rabbeinu Tam. And the next option according to Rabbeinu Tam, we're going to make more sense of next time. But he says another way to read the Gemara would be to say that the answer to this first question raised by the Gemara of how is it possible that Hillel made Pruzbol is actually answered by Rava. and Rava says hefker beitzin hefker, and we're gonna spend all of next time trying to piece together Rava's hefker beitzin hefker. So we're gonna move on from that, and then he gets to this thing that happens at the end of Erchin that Rashi talked about, and he uses that to argue that Yovel was practiced in the time of Bayit Sheni. So let's just look at the Erchin Gemara really quickly. We're not going to read through all of it; it's super long, but it's also like amazing. So the Gemara in Erchin is sitting on this like funny pasuk in Ezra that says there was no sukkah like this, or sukkahs hadn't been practiced in this way since the days of Joshua. So then the Erechim's trying to make sense of that verse in Ezra, and it says, "Mekish bi'atam mi-penei Ezra bi'atam mi-penei Yehoshua." We're in source number 11. Compares the arrival of the Jewish people in Eretz Israel in the days of Ezra to the arrival of Jewish people in the days of Yehoshua. Ma bi'atam mi-penei Yehoshua manu shmitim v'yovel v'kichu arei choma. Af bi'atam mi-penei Ezra manu shmitim yovel kichu arei choma. So just as in the days of Joshua, when they arrived, they counted Shemitahs and Yovels and they sanctified walled cities. So too, in the days of Ezra, they counted Shemitahs and Yovels and they sanctified walled cities. Then the Gemara goes on its merry way, comes back to it, and says, "Oh, Gabriel, to your question, Pruzbol asked your question, right? And he sends you the Nazir Lamabet Amabet. So go see there as an answer to your question." Okay, so then right, but then the Gemara says, wait, did they actually establish sabbatical years and jubilee years in the times of Ezra? And says exactly, wait, but Reuben, Gad, and Chatzi and Menashe weren't there, and that was the end of Yubel. And then it says, and then he also says like right, so I'm just trying to skip a little bit. Right, so basically, right, how could they have counted exactly the question that we're sitting on? How could they have counted Yovel years if not someone from every tribe came back with Ezra and they were all like sitting on their appropriate land? Like, how is it possible that they would have started practicing Yovel? And then they say, Ella Amar b'Yochanan, and at the bottom of the page in that Erchin, Amar Rabbi Yochanan says, Yirmiyahu hachaziran v'Yoshio ben Amon malach aleha. No, the Jubilee year wasn't in effect when the tribes of Reuben, Gad, and half of Menashe were exiled, but Yirmiyahu brought back all the exiled tribes, and Josiah ruled over them, as it's written in Yechezkel, for the seller shall not return to that which he has sold. However, it's complicated the way they learn that out a little bit from Yechezkel. But basically, the argument is at the end of here that potentially, at least, and this is how Pruzbol reads it, that even though they were exiled, Yirmiyahu actually brought everyone back, which means that when they were exiled again in the days of Yirmiyahu, someone from every tribe was exiled, and then Ezra brought someone from every tribe back, which, according to Pruzbol, would lay the groundwork for Yovel to be observed in Second Temple times. And then he ends on like a very lame little note. He says, "Miu kashet yizil kari be'irav ve'ezra mani l'kol yodeh shvatim." He says, it's a great read of the Gemara in Erchin, but everyone knows, right? Zil kari be'irav means to go ask the children in the yeshiva, and they would all tell you that in Ezra they did not have someone from all 12 tribes. So even though it's like a very fun read of the Gemara in Erchin, it doesn't actually kind of like all come together in the end, even in the Pruzbol. But Pruzbol, so Rashi, so just to like tie it up a little bit here, and then we will say why let's move until next week. We have a problem, which is like Hillel creates Pruzbol potentially in the time of the Beit HaMikdash, when it seems like maybe Shemitah was observed on Torah level. So in order to say, so you could say, like Rashi says, no, Shemitah wasn't observed on the Torah level in Bayit Sheni. Or you could say Pruzbol, which is Shemitah was observed on the Torah level in Bayit Sheni, and Hillel's takana did not take effect until after the temple was destroyed. So that's more or less what we saw for tonight. We're going to see, Tosfos did bring one other option, which is that, and this is like a very exciting one, that actually when Hillel did invent it in Bayit Sheni, even though Shemitah was D'oraita, even though there was Yovel, and he invented it on the power of Hefker Beitz and Hefker, which we will explore next time. So, and shkach everyone. Oh, okay. I'm done. I'm gonna take a look at Ozzy's question now. I just saw it. Is forgiving a loan in the halachic category of charity, in the sense that if you forgive a loan, you can count it towards your charity obligation? Well, presumably, because if the person needs it, because you just gave away money for free. So yes, okay. I would say almost certainly yes.
Okay, thank you so much, Rabbanit Sarna. And thank you, everyone who joined us today here on Zoom, on Facebook, and on Drisha Live. We will be live again tomorrow, Tuesday at 8 p.m. Eastern, with the third class in a series, Prayer and the Prayer Book. The Sidur is a guide to prayerful reflection with Rabbi Silber. In addition, you can always find out more information about class offerings and as well as the registration links on our website, www.drisha.org/classes, or you can watch recordings of the classes or watch the classes live at www.drisha.org/live. Thank you again for this opportunity to learn with you, Rabbanit Sarna. And again, thank you to everyone who attended. We really hope to see you soon at one of our upcoming classes here at Drisha.